The fog doesn't just hide the world, it changes it. In the gray silence, things appear that shouldn't exist. Tonight, 3 stories of what lingers in the mist. Let's begin. Last fall, I went back to visit my parents for a weekend. They live in a small town in northern Pennsylvania, the kind of place where most people know each other, and the streets are usually quiet after dark. I moved away a few years ago, but whenever I come back, I like taking my dog Luna for a walk along the river trail behind town. It's a narrow gravel path that follows the water for a couple miles. Early in the morning, it's usually empty. That morning, I woke up just after 6. The house was still dark, and my parents were asleep. Outside, the air felt cold and damp, the kind of chill you get near a river in late fall. When I stepped outside with Luna, the fog was already drifting through the street. By the time we reached the trail entrance, the town had almost disappeared behind us. The fog near the river was thicker. It rolled across the water and over the path, so that the trees faded into gray shapes after about 20 feet. At first, it felt peaceful, just the quiet sound of the river, and the light clicking of Luna's collar tags as she walked. We had been on the trail maybe 10 minutes. When she stopped, her ears lifted, and she turned toward the fog behind us. I looked back. The trail appeared empty. I assumed she had heard something moving in the brush, so I gave the leash a small tug and we continued walking. About a minute later, I heard something behind us. Footsteps, the sound of gravel shifting under someone's weight. I stopped walking and turned around. The sound stopped too. The fog covered the trail so heavily that I couldn't see very far. After a few seconds, a shape slowly formed out of the gray. A man. He was standing on the path behind us. Tall, wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled forward. The fog and the shadow from the hood made it hard to see his face clearly. He walked a few steps closer and then stopped. Luna began to growl quietly. I tried to keep the moment normal. "Morning," I said. He didn't respond. He didn't nod or wave. He just stood there, facing me. For a moment, I thought maybe he hadn't heard me, so I asked if he lived nearby. Still nothing. What made the situation feel strange wasn't just the silence, it was how still he was. He didn't adjust his stance or move his hands like someone who had been walking for a while. He simply stood there, watching. After a moment, I gave a polite smile and said, "All right, have a good walk." Then I turned around and started heading back toward town. I didn't hear footsteps behind us again, but Luna kept glancing over her shoulder for the rest of the walk. Eventually, the houses started appearing through the fog again. The whole encounter began to feel less threatening. By the time I reached my parents' house, I had convinced myself it was just a quiet local who didn't feel like talking. Inside, my dad was already in the kitchen making coffee. While I filled Luna's bowl, I mentioned that I had seen someone on the trail. My dad paused for a second. Then he said, "It might have been the man who recently moved into the house next door." Apparently, he mostly kept to himself. Some neighbors had seen him walking around town, very early in the morning, sometimes late at night too. After hearing that, the encounter made a little more sense. I didn't think much about it after that. That night, I woke up around 2 in the morning and went downstairs to get some water. The house was quiet. As I walked past the front door, I noticed a shape through the frosted glass. Someone standing on the porch. The motion light above the door clicked on. The man outside was wearing a dark hoodie. The hood was pulled low, just like before. His face was hidden in shadow. He wasn't knocking. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, facing the door. I backed away. and went upstairs to wake my dad. When we came back down, the porch light was still on. My dad checked outside. Nothing. He said it was probably someone passing by who triggered the light. Eventually, I went back to bed and tried not to think about it. The next morning, my dad asked me that strange question. "Did you meet someone on the river trail yesterday morning?" I asked him why. He said that around 6 that morning, he had looked out the kitchen window while making coffee. Through the fog, he could see someone standing near the end of the street, just standing there, watching in the direction of the river trail. My dad assumed it was someone out for an early walk, but when I mentioned seeing the man in the fog later that morning, the timing didn't really make sense, because the trail entrance is almost a mile from their house. Which means if it was the same person, he would have been standing on our street first, then somehow ended up behind me on the trail. And the more I think about it now, the more something else bothers me. When I turned around that morning in the fog, the man was already standing there, completely still, almost like he had been waiting. What I still can't figure out is this. If my dad saw someone near the house first, and I met someone on the trail later, was it the same person? Or were there two people in the fog that morning? We moved into the house at the beginning of spring. It sat at the end of a quiet road, one of those neighborhoods where the houses are spaced far apart and the nights feel unusually still. Behind our backyard there was a stretch of forest, and beyond it, a wide marsh the locals called alder wetlands. The realtor described it as peaceful. Birds in the morning, deer in the trees, fireflies in the summer. For our kids, it felt like an endless backyard adventure. Our son Evan was 9. Our daughter Maya was 6. They spent their afternoons running through the grass, building little forts from branches and throwing sticks into the reeds near the marsh. The fog was the first strange thing we noticed. Every evening, right around sunset, it would appear, not falling from the sky like normal fog. It slid out of the marsh, slowly spreading across the ground until the entire back half of the yard disappeared under a gray layer. At first, it felt almost peaceful, until the kids started talking about the lights. Maya mentioned them during dinner one night. "Mom," she said, "there are little lamps in the fog." I assumed she meant fireflies, but she shook her head. "They don't blink," she said. "They move around." Evan nodded. "They come from the marsh," he said quietly, "and they stop near the fence." We thought it was imagination. New house, new sounds, kids adjusting to a different place. That explanation worked for about a week. Then one evening, Evan ran inside earlier than usual. He looked unsettled. "What happened?" I asked. He glanced toward the backyard window. "There's something walking out there." I stepped outside with a flashlight. The fog had already swallowed most of the yard. The beam from my flashlight pushed into the mist, but faded after only a few feet. I didn't see anything moving, but when I switched the light off, I noticed something else. The marsh was making a sound. Not frogs, not insects. A dull knocking noise, slow and uneven, like someone tapping wood somewhere deep inside the fog. We told the kids it was probably wildlife, but after that, they refused to go near the fence once the fog rolled in. Maya said the lights sometimes moved closer. Evan said he heard splashing in the marsh. Then one night, he said something strange. "They don't start moving," he said, "until the fog reaches the yard." That stayed in my mind. We started bringing the kids inside before sunset. For a while, everything seemed normal again, until the night my husband and I decided to sit outside. The kids were asleep. We poured 2 glasses of wine and sat on the back porch. The forest behind the house was completely quiet. Then the fog arrived. It slid across the grass the same way it always did, creeping slowly toward the house. Within minutes, it reached the porch steps. My husband leaned forward. "Do you see that?" About 30 feet away, something faint began glowing inside the fog. At first, I thought it was a reflection. Then another glow appeared, and another. 3 pale lights drifting low above the grass. They moved slowly through the fog, weaving around each other like they were following paths we couldn't see. Then the knocking sound echoed again from the marsh. 2 sharp taps. The lights stopped. My husband whispered, "Are those people?" One of the lights began drifting toward the fence, slowly approaching until it hovered just a few feet from the wooden boards. The faint glow spread across the grass, and in that light, I saw the water behind the fence. The marsh had pushed farther up than usual. A thin layer of dark water stretched almost to the fence line. Something was standing in it. At first, my mind tried to explain it away. A broken branch, a stump. Then the water shifted around it. The shape adjusted slightly, as if it had been leaning forward, and slowly straightened. The knocking sound came again. 2 distant taps. The other lights drifted back toward the marsh. The silhouette turned. Ripples spread across the water. Then it lowered into the dark surface until the fog swallowed it completely. Within seconds, the lights faded back into the wetland. The yard looked empty again. We stayed outside for a long time. Neither of us touched our wine. Eventually, the fog thinned and drifted back toward the marsh. The yard cleared. Everything looked normal again. Until the next morning. Evan was already outside when I woke up. He was standing near the fence looking down at the grass. When I walked over, I saw what he was staring at. Footprints. They began at the fence. Long, narrow impressions pressed into the damp ground. They crossed the yard slowly, right up to the porch, and stopped directly beneath my husband's chair. "Did you go outside last night?" I asked Evan. He shook his head. "No." Then he pointed toward the marsh. "There were more lights last night." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" He looked confused. "The ones you saw." My stomach tightened. "How do you know we saw them?" He hesitated. Then he said quietly, "Because one of them came closer." I felt the air leave my chest. "Closer to where?" He pointed toward the house, to the porch. I looked back at the footprints in the grass. Then Evan added softly, "It stayed there for a long time." I asked him how he knew that. He shrugged slightly. "Because I was at my window, watching it look inside the house." Even the darkest stories leave something behind. Stay with me. There are more stories.